Hey fellow Python enthusiasts! Welcome back to another video. I'm Aurin and today we're gonna explore 3 critical issues I see many Python developers often do. By the end of this video, you will have the knowledge to write better and more readable code, and that will make you a senior Python developer. I will also share an additional tip at the end of the video, so stay tuned. My first tip is don't use dicts for everything. Do you also know the feeling where you just had to print a dict just to understand what's inside it? This is a common mistake that I see quite often, that dicts are used for everything. I mean, dicts are not a bad data structure. They are really important, but they should not be used for everything. So let's take a look at this dict. It is named dict.info and we see that it may contain some information. So what would we normally do is we would print the dict out, or we would read documentation of the class. So we have dict unknown unknown. It does not help anything, so we have to print it out. Let's do that. Python 3, tip 1, and we see, okay, it's name and age inside. But wouldn't it be more handy to have the information directly added? So let's see. I have another option that is using a class as the return. So we have the class info, and now if we do class info dot, and we see we have the age and the name variable on it, so we can do age, and we see we get an integer as a response. So it is way more handy to have this class instead of the dict. And if we print it, it looks exact the same. But even more handy is that we can have a nice representation of the class. So let's just print the class info, and it uses the toString class. So we see John is 42 years old. And if we go to the implementation, we see we have the class and it just takes the parameters to initialize. We also have the type on it. So we see we always have a name that is a string and an age that is an integer. And if we want to override the toString method, we can have it as well, and it looks way nicer. And the creation, I would say, is even more simpler than the dict because we don't have to write all the variables. Also, one common mistake I see is typos. For example, we have here name and age, but someone could have miswritten it. It's now names. And if we now go to the tip and we would say dict.info on the position name, we would have an issue. It says key error name because it does not contain name, it contains names. So in all our code, we have to check if the keys are correct. If we use the class instead, it is way easier because if we just have name, we see it's John. If we now change it to names, first of all, we see, okay, here's the typo. And now it says, okay, this identifier may be unknown. So we have the type hint of the language server as well. So it's way more handy to use it correctly. So the second tip is don't use OOP. Now this may raise some eyebrows because I just said please use classes, but now I say please don't use OOP. If you are really interested into the topic of object-oriented programming, I would highly recommend checking out my other video where I have a deep dive on that topic. But what do I mean with don't use object-oriented programming? Let's take a look. You should not use classes that has methods on it. Instead, use more functional programming, because methods on the class change the state of this instance. But what we should aim for is creating a new instance with a changed state instead of changing the old instance, because we don't know who else is using the same instance. In this example, let's say you have a car that has a color and a mileage. So you could say we increase the mileage on the car with just increasing it on the car itself, on the instance. So you would have just a method that says increase mileage, you give it a mileage and you increased it. So like this, you create the instance of the class and then you increase the mileage on the class and have new mileage. We have now 10,100 miles. The problem with this is if you call the method twice, you increase the mileage by 200. And if someone is taking this car and it changes the value somewhere else, you now have increased mileage even so you don't intend it to. So a better way would be you have the instance of car that still has the color and the mileage, but instead of increasing it on the car itself, you create a method that takes the car, takes the new mileage and returns a new car. So the old car will not be changed. So let's take a look at the car, change it to 1000. So now we still have, after the increase, 1000. Why is that? Because we print the old car. If we now take a look at the updated car, we have 1100. And this makes way more sense because you did not change the value of the instance. You created a new instance based on the old instance and the new value. With that, you avoid state inconsistencies, side effects, and that other people changed your state. And as I said in the beginning, if you are interested in why you shouldn't use object-oriented programming, take a look at the other video. Avoid the assumption of environment variables. So this may be more of a LangChain issue, but I see this very often in Python libraries. Don't do that. So the issue here is that LangChain is just assuming that there are environment variables if you don't set them. What I mean with that is you could set the OpenAPI key, like that. But LangChain is just assuming the environment variable is set as a default. So you don't need to do that if you have it in your environment and named it correctly. By that I mean you can have it as OpenAI base URL set in your environment, and it automatically is set in the library as well. Why is this an issue? In a project, I had a container where the environment variables are already set. I had no access to the configuration, so I needed to print them out to see what environment variables were set. And apparently it was the OpenAI base URL as well as the Azure OpenAI base URL set. And LangChain just assumed that one or the other is set, but not both, so it crashed. And the documentation don't say that. It's just a check somewhere deep in the library and you will not find out until it crashes. So the problem is that it just assumes stuff. It would make way more sense to instantiate the class with the environment variables read by myself and give to the class. Why would you assume that someone set these environment variables as a default? This makes no sense at all. My additional tip is regarding docstrings. So what I quite often see is very extensive docstring usage, what in general is not a bad thing, but still you should be quite intentional with docstrings. They should not be used as an excuse to write bad function names or bad argument names. So for example, here we have a bad docstring. The interesting function adds 2 parameters. It says this interesting function takes 2 parameters and adds them. And as we see here, it does a bit more. It doubles the first argument and adds the second argument. So first of all, this docstring is outdated, and second of all, it lies. And I see this more often than you think, that docstrings are set, but they are not updated. And I really recommend just writing docstrings if they are needed. And I would say I rather have no docstring than a wrong docstring. Because then I can see, okay, this calculation function takes 2 parameters and returns 1 new parameter. And if I want to know what it does, I jump to it and read how it calculates. I mean, better would be the third option where you see, okay, I have 2 parameters, it returns 2 times the first argument plus the second argument. And if I'm still interested, I can go to the function and read through it. But if I just have the add function, I add 2 parameters, I really don't need a docstring. So I just have add. Why should I have a docstring for that? So I hope you learned some new tips and tricks that help you to enhance your Python skills. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe, because 98% of my viewers are not subscribed yet. So I would love to have you as a subscriber as well. So if you have any tips that I missed, let me know down in the comments, because others probably would love to see as well. Until next time, happy coding!